"You can't have that here," she said, her voice slicing through the quiet afternoon air like a shard of glass. It was the first sentence she ever spoke to me, and in it, I heard the overture to an opera I never wanted a ticket for. I had been in the house for exactly 3 weeks. My late wife, Sarah, had always called this her forever house, the one she grew up in, the one her parents had built with their own hands. After she was gone, moving in felt less like a choice and more like a pilgrimage. It was the last place that still held the echo of her laugh. All I wanted was to be left alone with the ghosts and the memories. The community, Maple Creek Estates, seemed designed for that purpose. It was a manicured maze of quiet streets, identical mailboxes standing at attention, and lawns so green they looked like they'd been colored in with a Crayola. It was the kind of place where the loudest sound was supposed to be a sprinkler. I was a regional manager for the power utility, a job that involved orchestrating responses to chaos, storms, blackouts, catastrophic failures. I craved the opposite in my personal life. I craved order. I craved silence. Then Carol happened. She was standing on the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, her body coiled with an authority she clearly felt was God-given. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown of thorns she expected everyone else to bleed from. Her eyes were fixed on the new backup generator I'd had installed near the side of my house, tucked discreetly behind a lattice screen and some freshly planted shrubs. "I'm sorry," I asked, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. I had been doing some final wiring checks. "The generator," she snapped, pointing a finger that looked like a weapon. "It's an unapproved external structure. It's a violation of Covenant 7b, subsection 4. It has to go." I looked at the generator. It was a high-end, quiet model, smaller than most central air conditioning units. "It's a medical necessity," I explained, trying to keep my tone even. "And for my work. It's fully up to city code, I had it permitted and inspected myself." "I don't care about the city's code," she sniffed, as if the city were some quaint, irrelevant village. "I care about the HOA's code. You didn't submit an architectural request form. It's an eyesore, and it lowers property values." I looked around at the pristine, soulless perfection of the neighborhood. A single, professionally installed generator was going to tank the market. It seemed unlikely. The static of her self-importance was buzzing in the air, interfering with the quiet I had just started to find. I was annoyed, but I was still in peace-seeking mode. I figured it was a misunderstanding, a bit of bureaucratic overreach from someone who took her unpaid job far too seriously. "Look," I said, forcing a neighborly smile. "I apologize if I missed a step. I'm new here, still getting my bearings after my wife passed. How about I fill out the form now, retroactively? I can show you the permits, the schematics. It's quieter than the cicadas in the summer." Her face hardened, cracking like cheap concrete. "The rules are not suggestions, Mr. Mark," I supplied. "Mr. Mark. The rules are what separate us from chaos. The rules keep this community desirable. You have 14 days to remove it, or you will be fined. $100 a day. It's all in the bylaws you received when you moved in." She turned on her heel and marched away, her back ramrod straight. She didn't just walk, she patrolled. I stood there, rag in hand, and watched her go. $100 a day for a piece of equipment that could literally save a life during an outage. It was absurd. But I was tired. The grief of losing Sarah was a heavy cloak I wore every day, and I didn't have the energy for a fight. That evening, I dug out the mountain of paperwork that was the HOA bylaws. It was a document thicker than the owner's manual for a nuclear submarine. I read it cover to cover, highlighting passages with a yellow marker. And there, buried in the appendices, I found it. A clause allowing for the installation of emergency medical equipment with a doctor's note, and another for equipment required for professional duties, provided it adhered to local noise and safety ordinances. My generator qualified on both counts. I felt a small, weary flicker of victory. I typed up a polite, formal letter to the HOA board, quoting the specific bylaws, and attached copies of the city permit, the inspection report, a letter from my doctor, and a letter from my company's head of operations. I laid out my case with the same precision I used for a post-outage report. It was irrefutable. I dropped it in the official HOA mailbox at the community clubhouse the next morning, feeling confident that reason would prevail. I was a fool. Reason had no place in Carol's kingdom. 2 days later, a notice was taped to my front door. It wasn't a letter. It was a bright pink violation slip, the kind you get for parking in a fire lane. The subject line read, "Final warning, unapproved structure." Below, in her spiky, aggressive handwriting, was a note, "Bylaws are subject to board interpretation. The board's interpretation is that your machine is an unsightly nuisance. Your appeal is denied." The board. I knew from a quick chat with my neighbor, a retired cop named Frank, that the board consisted of Carol, her sycophantic secretary, and a terrified-looking accountant who just rubber-stamped whatever Carol wanted. This wasn't a denial, it was a decree. That was the moment the initial annoyance began to curdle into real frustration. This wasn't about a generator anymore. This was about power. Her power. And my refusal to simply bow to it. I wasn't asking for an exception, I was following the rules she claimed to worship. Her rejection of my airtight evidence felt like a personal insult. It was illogical. It was a bully's move. I decided to attend the next monthly HOA meeting. I would present my case in person, in front of the other homeowners. Surely, in a public forum, she wouldn't be able to just invent reality. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of pine sol and quiet desperation. About 15 residents were scattered among the folding chairs, looking bored. Carol sat at the head table, flanked by her 2 bored cronies, radiating an aura of smug command. When the floor opened for new business, I stood up. I calmly and concisely presented my case again, holding up my file of documents. I spoke about Sarah, about my job, about the bylaws. I kept my voice steady, my arguments based entirely on the text of the rules she was supposed to be enforcing. Carol let me finish. She had a thin, unpleasant smile on her face the entire time. "Thank you for your impassioned plea, Mr. Mark," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "However, as I already informed you, the board has interpreted the relevant bylaws. We have a duty to maintain the aesthetic harmony of Maple Creek. Your industrial machine disrupts that harmony." "It's a residential generator," I corrected her. "It's behind a screen. You can't even see it from the street." "I can see it," she said, her voice dropping. "I know it's there. And that's enough. The matter is closed." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke up. I could feel their fear. It was a palpable thing in the room, thick and suffocating. They knew this was wrong, but they were too afraid of being her next target to say anything. I looked from face to face, and all I saw were eyes looking down at their laps. That night, the fines began. $100. The notice was in my mailbox the next morning. And the next. And the next. Every day, a new pink slip. It was a war of attrition. She thought she could bleed me dry, that I would eventually give in just to make it stop. She had misjudged me. My job was about managing pressure. I dealt with governors, with mayors, with entire towns panicking in the dark. A woman with a Napoleon complex and a book of rules wasn't going to break me. The frustration was now hardening into something colder, something more methodical. The peace I had sought in this house was being deliberately destroyed. If I couldn't have peace, then I would have justice. The harassment escalated. She started filing official complaints with the city. A noise complaint, which was summarily dismissed when the responding officer's decibel meter showed my generator was quieter than her yapping terrier. A code violation complaint about my unauthorized construction, which was closed the moment the inspector saw my permit. Each one was a waste of my time and the city's resources. Then she went public. A notice appeared on the community bulletin board, the one right next to the pool. It was titled, "Community Standards Alert," and detailed my refusal to comply with neighborhood bylaws, painting me as a rogue element, a danger to their precious property values. It listed my address. My name. It was public shaming, plain and simple. My neighbor, Frank, came over that evening, holding a beer. He was a big, gruff man with kind eyes who had lived here for 20 years. "Saw the notice," he said, shaking his head. "She's a piece of work, that one. Been running this place like her own little fiefdom since her husband left her. Gets worse every year. Why does anyone put up with it? I asked, gesturing at the perfectly aligned houses. Easier to keep your head down, Frank said, taking a long pull from his bottle. You fight back, you become the target. She'll make your life a living hell. Fines you for the grass being a quarter-inch too high. Measures the color of your trim with a paint swatch. Most people just give in. I'm not most people, I said, and I felt the truth of it settle in my bones. The part of me that had wanted to retreat, to hide in my grief, was being burned away by a cold, rising anger. The turning point came a week later. It was a Tuesday night, and a storm was rolling in. The kind of storm that made my professional instincts kick into high gear. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind was starting to howl. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. The whole neighborhood was plunged into darkness. A few seconds later, a low hum started from the side of my house. The lights in my living room came back on. My generator had kicked in automatically, just as it was designed to do. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Out my window, I could see the dark shapes of my neighbors' houses, silent and powerless. My house was an island of light in a sea of black. I was in my office, reviewing outage maps on my laptop, when I heard a strange sound from outside. A scraping, followed by a sharp snap. Then, my lights went out again. But this time, it was different. The generator didn't kick back in. The house was utterly silent, utterly dark. A deep, primal wrongness washed over me. The generator failing during a transfer was almost impossible. It was a fail-safe system. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from my desk, my heart starting to pound with a feeling that was no longer just anger, but genuine alarm. I went out the side door into the howling wind and rain. I pointed the beam at the generator. It was fine. Then I tracked the thick, armored cable that ran from the generator to the main service panel of the house. And then I saw it. The cable, a conduit designed to withstand decades of weather and wear, had been cut. Hacked through with something heavy and sharp, like an axe or a pair of bolt cutters. The copper wires inside splayed out like a severed nerve. It was a clean, deliberate cut. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't a nasty note on a bulletin board. This was a criminal act. This was a direct, physical attack on my home. It was dangerous, stupidly so. Cutting a line like that could have electrocuted someone, started a fire. It was felony destruction of property. And I had no doubt in my mind who had done it. I stood there in the rain, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The wind whipped around me, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. The line had been crossed. Not my property line, but a moral and legal line that could not be uncrossed. My desire for a quiet life was dead. My attempt at reason was over. The man who had moved into this house seeking peace was gone. In his place stood a strategist. A manager of chaotic systems. And I was now looking at the most chaotic, irrational system I had ever encountered, Carol. She had just declared war. She had no idea that she was fighting a man who managed the entire grid she had just foolishly and illegally disconnected herself from. She thought she had cut a wire to my house. What she had really done was cut the last thread of my restraint. I went back inside, dripping water onto the floor. I didn't bother trying to fix the cable in the storm. I sat in the dark, and I started to make a plan. A real plan. Not a defensive reaction, but a proactive, systematic strategy. My grief for Sarah had been a fog, but this act of aggression was a lightning strike that cleared the air. I had a new project. I called it Project Grid Correction. The first phase was information. The next morning, with the power back on and the storm past, I meticulously documented the damage. I took high-resolution photos of the severed cable from every conceivable angle. I had one of my company's best forensic line crews come out, off the books, as a favor, to analyze the cut. Their official report was clinical and damning, deliberate severing by a non-standard, manual cutting tool. Not consistent with animal damage, weather, or equipment failure. Next, I upgraded my home security. I didn't just install a few cameras. I leveraged my professional knowledge of infrastructure security. I installed concealed, weatherproof, 4K cameras with night vision and audio recording capabilities. One was aimed directly at the generator and the power line. Another covered my driveway. A third, disguised as a birdhouse, had a perfect, wide-angle view of the street and the front of Carol's house directly across from mine. I was building a web of surveillance she would never see. Then, I started digging. I spent my evenings not in quiet reflection, but in a deep dive into public records. I pulled the deeds for every house in the HOA. I got copies of the original incorporation documents for Maple Creek Estates. I cross-referenced everything with the city planning and zoning departments. Frank, my retired cop neighbor, was a goldmine. He taught me how to navigate the labyrinth of public information requests and pointed me toward the right databases. "You're looking for patterns," he told me over another beer on his porch. "Bullies like her, they don't just start yesterday. They've been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs their whole lives. You just have to know where to look." He was right. I found a history of frivolous lawsuits she had filed against previous neighbors. I found liens she had placed on properties for minor infractions, liens that were often settled for cash with no official record of the payment going to the HOA treasury. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. It was a pattern. But the real breakthrough came from my own domain, the power grid. I had a hunch. Her obsession with control, her complete disregard for the law when it came to my power line, it felt like more than just a personality quirk. It felt personal. So, I did something I rarely do. I used my high-level access to the utilities records for a non-emergency purpose. I pulled the entire electrical history for the Maple Creek Estates common areas, the streetlights, the clubhouse, the fountain at the entrance. My screen glowed in the dark of my office. I analyzed the data, running diagnostics I usually reserved for identifying major grid faults. And there it was. A discrepancy. A ghost in the machine. The power consumption for the common areas was impossibly low. The streetlights, the pool pumps, the 24-hour landscape lighting around the entrance sign, they should have been drawing a consistent, measurable load. According to the meters, they were barely using more power than a single-family home. It made no sense. Unless they weren't being powered by the official HOA meters. My heart started beating faster. I cross-referenced the common area grid maps with the residential maps. I spent hours tracing digital lines, following the flow of electricity from the substation all the way down to our street. And then I found it. A tap. An illegal, unmetered tap. The main power line for all of the common areas wasn't coming from the commercial account registered to the HOA. It was spliced directly into the residential line of the house next to the clubhouse. The house that belonged to the terrified-looking board accountant. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind I got when we finally pinpointed the source of a massive blackout. The HOA was stealing electricity. 4 years. The accountant was either a hostage or a co-conspirator, letting the entire community's electrical bill run through his personal meter in exchange for, what? No HOA dues. A blind eye to his own violations. And Carol had to be the one orchestrating it. This wasn't just about power and control anymore. This was about money. A lot of money. The HOA budget, which I'd gotten a copy of, showed a line item for community utilities that was thousands of dollars a month. But the utility company wasn't getting that money. The bills for the actual metered usage were a fraction of that. So where was the rest of the money going? I leaned back in my chair, the scope of her corruption dawning on me. She wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a criminal. A fraud. And her attack on me, on my generator, on my power line, it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about her terror of anyone with expertise in her particular field of crime. I wasn't just a new neighbor, I was an industry professional. I was a threat. My very presence, my very profession, was a danger to her entire illicit operation. She wasn't trying to push me out because of an eyesore. She was trying to push me out before I saw what was hidden in plain sight. Too late. Now it was time for the second phase of Project Grid Correction, setting the trap. I knew she was watching me. I knew my defiance had enraged her. I needed to give her a target, something she couldn't resist. I repaired the severed power line. But I did it in the most ostentatious, technically perfect but visually annoying way possible. I didn't just replace the cable. I installed a brand new, heavy-duty steel conduit. I mounted a large, industrial-looking junction box on the wall, complete with warning labels and a bright yellow handle. Everything was meticulously squared, leveled, and bolted down. It was a fortress of electrical engineering. It was beautiful in its functionality. And I knew, to her, it would look like a monstrous scar on the side of my house. It was perfectly, unimpeachably up to every single national, state, and local code. It was, by any objective measure, a massive safety and security upgrade. It was also bait. I made sure to do the work on a Saturday morning when I knew she'd be home, likely peering at me through her blinds. I took my time. I whistled. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to stew. I wanted her to fixate on this new, ugly, defiant piece of hardware. The cameras were rolling. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the rat to get curious. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, around 2 a.m., I got a motion alert on my phone. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping, and pulled up the live feed from the camera aimed at the generator. The night vision view was crystal clear. A figure, dressed in dark clothing with a hoodie pulled low, was creeping along the side of my house. It was Carol. I watched, my breath held, as she approached the new conduit. She had a can of something in her hand. Spray paint. She shook it, the rattling sound barely audible through the phone speaker. She was going to vandalize it. Graffiti my brand new, legally immaculate installation. It was petty. It was perfect. She raised the can. But then she stopped. She seemed to be thinking. She looked around, her head on a swivel. Then, she put the spray paint down and pulled something else from her pocket. A small crowbar. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just going to paint it. She was going to try to pry the junction box off the wall. She was going to try to destroy it, just like she'd destroyed the cable. The sheer, suicidal stupidity of it was breathtaking. Prying at a live, high-amperage electrical box with a metal crowbar was a fantastic way to get herself killed. But before she could, another motion alert came through. This one from the camera on the street. A car was cruising slowly down the block. A police car. Just a routine patrol. Carol froze like a startled deer. She snatched up her crowbar and her paint can and scurried back into the shadows, disappearing toward her own house. The patrol car continued on its way, oblivious. I let out a long, slow breath. She had incriminated herself. Trespassing, attempted vandalism, possession of burglary tools. It was all there, recorded in pristine 4K. It wasn't the dramatic finale I was hoping for, but it was more than enough for the next step. The next HOA meeting was in a week. I prepared my presentation. This would be the first reveal. Not the whole story. Just a taste. A warning shot across her bow to see how she would react. The night of the meeting arrived. The clubhouse had the same stale air, the same dozen or so defeated-looking homeowners. Carol was in her usual spot, radiating smugness. She opened the meeting with a triumphant announcement. "The board is pleased to report," she began, a shark smile on her face, "that we are moving forward with legal action against Mr. Mark for his continued violations. The daily fines now total over $2,000, and our attorney will be placing a lien on his property. We will not allow one person's arrogance to undermine our community." A murmur went through the small crowd. This was a public execution. When she finished, I raised my hand. "I have a point of order regarding the alleged violations." She sighed dramatically. "Mr. Mark, this has been discussed. The matter is closed." "Actually," I said, my voice calm and carrying through the room, "I have new information to present to the board. It concerns the security and integrity of residents' property. Specifically, my property." I had a small projector and a laptop with me. Before she could object, I had it set up and aimed at the blank wall behind her. "I've recently had some trouble with a prowler," I said, "and I'd like to show you all what my new security system captured." I hit play. The video filled the wall. The grainy, green-tinged night vision. The side of my house, the new conduit gleaming under the infrared light. And then, the figure in the hoodie, creeping into the frame. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. As the figure turned, the hood slipped back for a second, and the camera's high resolution caught her face perfectly. It was unmistakably Carol. A collective gasp went through the room. I let the video play. Her looking around furtively. Her pulling out the spray paint. Her swapping it for the crowbar. I paused the video on a perfect, clear shot of her holding the metal tool, poised to attack the junction box. As you can see, I said, my voice as level as a surveyor's plane, this individual was on my property at 2 a.m, equipped to commit vandalism and destruction of property. I have already filed a police report. I looked directly at Carol. Her face was a mask of chalky white fury. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish, but no sound was coming out. She finally found her voice. It came out as a shriek. This is an outrage. That video is fake. It's doctored. He's a tech wizard, he could have faked this. This is harassment. He's harassing me. Her denial was too fast, too hysterical. Her 2 board members looked at her, then at the screen, then back at her, their faces pale with shock and dawning horror. They knew it was her. Everyone in that room knew it was her. You're the one who is breaking the rules, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You and your ugly machine. I will not be intimidated. I will have you thrown out of this neighborhood. You'll see. You will all see. She was losing control, her carefully constructed facade of regal authority crumbling into the raw, screeching rage of a cornered animal. She had lost her credibility in that room. I could see it in the eyes of my neighbors. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something new, contempt. But she hadn't lost her power. Not yet. The trap had been sprung, but the animal was now wounded, and wounded animals are the most dangerous. I knew her retaliation would be swift and vicious. I was ready for it. The next 48 hours were a blur of escalation. Carol went on an absolute rampage. A letter appeared in every single mailbox in the neighborhood, printed on official HOA letterhead. It was a rambling, unhinged manifesto that accused me of being a corporate spy, a professional stalker, and a danger to the community's children. She claimed the video was a deep fake I had created using my advanced corporate resources to frame her. It was libelous, slanderous, and utterly insane. Then came the calls to my work. She somehow got the direct line to my superior, the vice president of regional operations. She spent an hour on the phone with him, screaming that I was using company assets to terrorize a private citizen, that I was mentally unstable, and that I was a liability who should be fired immediately. My boss called me right after. I could hear the weary resignation in his voice. "Mark," he said, "I've just had the most colorful conversation with a woman named Carol from your HOA." I calmly explained the situation, from the initial fine to the severed power line to the video evidence. I told him I had filed a police report and was handling it through legal channels. To his eternal credit, he laughed. "Good Lord, Mark. You find trouble even when you're trying to be quiet. Look, I know you. She sounds like a nutcase. Just keep us out of it. Corporate doesn't need the headache. But, if you need any official documentation about the cost of the damages or a statement on the illegality of tampering with utility infrastructure, you let me know. We'll back you up." I thanked him, relieved. Her attempt to ruin my career had failed. But she wasn't done. The next attack was far more personal, far more vile. She created a fake social media profile and started posting on the community Facebook page. The posts accused me of being a registered sex offender, using doctored public records to prove it. She claimed my generator was being used to power a dungeon in my basement. It was the lowest, most despicable kind of smear campaign. Frank called me, his voice tight with rage. "I saw the post, Mark. I'm getting it taken down. This is beyond the pale. This is criminal harassment." I was stunned. The sheer venom of it took my breath away. To attack my character like that, to use such a heinous lie, it was the act of a truly desperate and depraved person. The cold, methodical anger I'd been nursing flared into a hot, white rage. She had brought my family, my home, and now my very name into her filthy war. That was it. No more holding back. No more phased rollouts. It was time to end it. And just as I made that decision, the final piece of the puzzle fell right into my lap. There was a knock on my door late that night. It was George, the timid accountant from the HOA board. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His hands were trembling as he clutched a thick manila envelope. "Can I come in?" he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder at Carol's house across the street. I ushered him inside. He wouldn't sit down. He just stood in my entryway, wringing his hands. "I saw the video at the meeting," he said, his voice barely audible. "And the letters she sent out, the things she's saying about you on the internet. She's out of control. I can't be a part of it anymore. I'm afraid of her, but I'm more afraid of what happens if I don't do this." He thrust the envelope into my hands. "This is everything," he said. "The real budget. The bank statements. The invoices from the landscaping company." I opened the envelope. Inside was a set of financial records. It was all there, in black and white. The line item for community utilities was indeed over $4,000 a month. The actual payments to the utility company, from his own account, were less than $500. The rest, a neat $3,500, was transferred every month to a company called Evergreen Solutions. "That's her landscaping company," George said, confirming my suspicion. "It's a shell corporation." I looked it up. The only director is her. She's been billing the HOA for services that are never performed and pocketing the money. For almost 6 years. 6 years. $3,500 a month. I did the math in my head. It was over $250,000. She hadn't just been stealing electricity. She had been systematically embezzling a fortune from her neighbors. "The electrical tap was her idea," George continued, the words spilling out of him in a rush. "She told me if I didn't agree, she'd find a dozen violations on my property and fine me into foreclosure. She said she owned the board and no one could stop her. I was weak. I'm sorry." "You're not weak, George," I said, looking at the documents in my hand. This was the smoking gun. This was the nail for her coffin. You're the one who is going to stop her. I now had everything. I had video of her trespassing and attempting to destroy my property. I had the utility company's official report on the severed line. I had the digital evidence of the illegal power tap. I had the financial records proving years of embezzlement and wire fraud. And I had a whistleblower, a key witness who could testify to all of it. Project Grid Correction was moving to its final phase. The next morning, I didn't call the local police. This was bigger than a simple vandalism complaint now. I called the district attorney's office and spoke to the head of the Economic Crimes Unit. I called the State Utility Commission's Enforcement Division. I laid out the case calmly and provided them with a secure digital folder containing all of my evidence, the videos, the reports, the financial statements, and a sworn, notarized affidavit from George. The wheels of justice began to turn, and they turned faster than I could have imagined. Her crimes were so blatant, the evidence so overwhelming, that they saw it for what it was, a slam-dunk case. A special meeting for the entire Maple Creek Estates community was called. It wasn't called by Carol. It was called by a petition, signed by over half the residents. Frank and I had gone door to door. After the video at the last meeting and her subsequent meltdown, people were finally ready to listen. The fear had broken. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday night. The clubhouse was packed. People were standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. This wasn't a boring monthly meeting, this was a tribunal. Carol was there, at the head table, but she looked different. Her smug confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive anger. She knew she had lost the room. She tried to seize control, banging her gavel. "This is an illegal meeting," she declared. "It was not called by the board. I do not recognize its legitimacy." Frank, standing beside me, spoke up, his old police captain's voice booming through the room. "It's legitimate under Bylaw 14C, Carol. A meeting can be called by a petition of 51% of homeowners. We have 62%. Sit down." She sat, her face thunderous. I walked to the front of the room, to the projector I had set up again. I didn't look at Carol. I looked at my neighbors. My name is Mark, I began. I've lived here for a few months. All I wanted was a quiet place to live. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. So instead, I'm going to give you all something else. The truth. For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. I went step by step, my voice calm and measured. I was presenting a report, the final report of Project Grid Correction. I started with the generator and the bylaws that permitted it. I moved to the campaign of harassment, the false complaints, the public shaming. I played the video again of her on my property in the middle of the night. This time, no one gasped. They just stared at her, their faces hard with disgust. I showed the high-resolution photos of the severed power line and read the key findings from my company's forensic report. This wasn't just vandalism, I said. This was a felony that endangered my home and the surrounding properties. Then, I moved to the finances. I put George's documents up on the screen. The fake utility budgets. The real utility bills. The bank transfers to Evergreen Solutions. I put up the state incorporation document for Evergreen Solutions, with her name listed as the sole director. For 6 years, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, the president of our HOA has been embezzling roughly $3,500 a month from our dues. That is $210,000. Money that was supposed to be for maintaining our community, our homes. Your money. A wave of angry shouts erupted from the crowd. People were on their feet, yelling, pointing at Carol. She leaped to her feet, her face a contorted mask of pure hatred. Lies. All of it. Forged documents. He's a criminal. He's trying to destroy our community. And finally, I said, my voice cutting through her shrieking, there is the matter of the power theft. I put up the grid map from the utility company, a bright red line showing the illegal tap. For 6 years, the HOA has been stealing electricity, running up the personal bill of one of your neighbors under threat and duress, all to cover up the embezzlement. That was the final blow. The room exploded. It was chaos. And in the middle of that chaos, the doors to the clubhouse opened. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by a man in a suit who flashed a badge. He was a detective from the DA's office. They walked straight to the head table. Straight to Carol. She saw them coming, and something inside her finally broke. Her rage collapsed into a raw, animal panic. No. You can't. I am the president. I run this place. You have no authority here. Carol Miller, the detective said, his voice calm and bored, you're under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and destruction of utility infrastructure. As the officers moved to cuff her, she completely lost her mind. She started screaming, throwing papers off the table, her voice a shrill, incoherent siren of rage and self-pity. She even confessed, shouting, I did it for this community. To protect it from people like him. I deserve that money. They put the handcuffs on her. The sound of the metal clicking shut seemed to echo in the now silent room. Every eye was on her. The tyrant of Maple Creek, stripped of her power, exposed as a common thief. As they led her out, she locked eyes with me. Her face was a mess of tears and fury. You'll pay for this, Mark, she screamed, her voice cracking. I'll sue you for everything you have. This isn't over. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a hollow threat from a person with nothing left. It was the sound of my victory. It was over. The aftermath was swift and cleansing. With Carol gone, the entire rotten structure of the HOA collapsed. Her 2 cronies on the board resigned in disgrace the next day. An emergency election was held, and a new board was voted in. Frank, to his initial chagrin and everyone else's relief, was elected the new president. The very first motion they passed was to rescind all fines and legal actions initiated by Carol in the past year. The second was to formally apologize to me. The third was to hire a forensic accountant to go through every dime the HOA had ever spent under her reign. The community began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted, replaced by a genuine sense of neighborliness. People started talking to each other again. The ridiculous, nitpicky rules were abolished. Someone painted their front door a cheerful shade of blue, and nobody said a word. It was a revolution in beige. Carol's fate was a matter of public record. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. She was forced to pay back every single cent she had embezzled, which meant selling her house and liquidating all her assets. She lost everything. Her power, her money, her home, her freedom. It was a complete and total ruin, a downfall entirely of her own making. Poetic justice, served cold. I finally got what I had come here for. Peace. The generator hummed quietly during the occasional outage, a silent guardian no one complained about. My days were filled with the challenges of my job, and my evenings were filled with the quiet comfort of the home Sarah had loved so much. Sometimes, I would sit on the back porch and think about the whole insane ordeal. I never wanted to be a hero or a giant killer. I just wanted to be left alone. But I learned something. Bullies, whether they're on a playground or on an HOA board, thrive on the silence of those they intimidate. They count on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about defending your property. It's about defending your peace. A few months after the big showdown, the new HOA board threw a community barbecue. Frank tried to get me to make a speech, but I declined. I just stood at the back, nursing a beer, watching my neighbors laugh and chat. They were free. I was free. The grid had been corrected. And the silence that followed was the sweetest sound in the world.